Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready. But we're going to start with the bad news to get it out of the way. And while it is bad, it's not necessarily surprising at this point, as Todd Harrison shares that the U.S. Supreme Court denies medical cannabis workers' compensation cases, which is very unfortunate because the Supreme Court is supposed to be neutral and act in the best interests of the American people. But sadly, the U.S. Supreme Court is choosing to pick sides, which is also not their job, and chooses to go with incompetence, much like the Dems. And so while this is very shameful and unfortunate, it's kind of a sign of the times right now. And so this comes a month after the DOJ encouraged the High Court to reject the cannabis cases, arguing broader cannabis policy choices are better left to Congress, which is totally untrue because they've not been able to do anything, or the executive branch, which is also untrue because yet they've not been able to do anything. And so while we reported last week that the DOJ is expected to make an announcement on cannabis, we have yet to hear anything up until Wednesday today. So just wanted to share this as unfortunate news to get out of the way early as we move through the stories. And this one comes from Brady Cobb Law, sharing what Benjamin A. Smith, who works for the Dales Report, did tweet, highlighting that the DEA is making way more arrests and seizing more cannabis under new administrator Ann Milgram. And it was Joe Biden who formally nominated Milgram for the DEA admin position, confirmed by Senate Judiciary Committee. Further highlighting that while the Biden administration claims to be friendly on cannabis with their words, their actions clearly prove otherwise, as politics is still just a big game of perception versus reality. And so with that, I did not get a breakdown of the arrest, but I will post the link in the description below as well if you wanted to check that out. But basically, I just want to share that obviously we want to support, using resources to go after illicit grows, traffickers, or anyone involved in organized crime that could lead to violence. However, we obviously do not want to see any more arrests for simple possession or nonviolent drug crimes. But apparently the data revealed that the DEA made significantly more cannabis-related arrests in 2021, more than in prior years, despite reform efforts in states and Congress. As an annual report from the DEA's Domestic Cannabis Eradication Suppression Program says that the agency confiscated more than 5.5 million cannabis plants and arrested approximately 6,600 people over cannabis last year. That's a big step up in enforcement compared to 2020, amounting to an increase of nearly 1 million plants and more than 1,000 arrests. Put into perspective, that's a 22% increase in plants chopped down, which does sound positive, which would lead us to believe that they are going after illicit grows, which I would support. However, a 32% bump into the number of people put in handcuffs over a 12-month period. And so while we don't know how many of these arrests were for simple possession or nonviolent offenses, and hopefully as few as possible because the DEA we know is likely going after illicit grows and not individuals for small petty instances like that. Just another example though of an agency that is basically doing the opposite of what the messaging coming from the administration is saying. But with that, just wanted to share the third bad news that we start with before we get to the good stuff, as Tom Engel shares just now. As I reported last week that House leaders were urging or trying to get certain provisions put into some Justice Department spending bill. Apparently, House leaders posted a new Justice Department spending bill, but it doesn't include the broad state cannabis protections advocates wanted. They'll have to pursue an amendment for it. But are you even surprised anymore? And what's more infuriating, based on observing over the last few years, and this is coming from both sides, but how media outlets are now more and more reporting on the intention to act as opposed to reporting when something actually gets done, which from my understanding growing up most of my life, that was news, when something actually changed and got done, as opposed to expressing the intention to change something and then not doing it. Because we could have waited until this week, Tom, for you to just relay this news, as opposed to getting our hopes up last week with the article, dozens of bipartisan members of Congress are pushing House leaders to include provisions protecting state and tribal cannabis programs from Justice Department interference in a must-pass spending bill being introduced next week. It's great that they're pushing, but that's not news when their pushing is useless. And so while that is unfortunate, apparently it does have medical cannabis and hemp provisions, however, which essentially doesn't change much. So rant over, but we love you, Tom Engel, for all the work that you put into Marijuana Moment, helping us understand what is happening in Congress and keeping us in the loop. The reality is Marijuana Moment is still a very left-wing publication, and so more and more we've got to start taking what they say as well, especially the intentions they announce, with a grain of salt. So lesson learned. But with that, some good news from Marijuana Moment as the American Medical Association approves cannabis expungements resolution and addresses over-medicalization of cannabis. Don't you mean under-medicalization of cannabis? And so with that, the members of the AMA voted to adopt a measure this week expressing support for expunging prior cannabis records in states that have legalized cannabis. As the organization's House of Delegates, which maintains an overarching policy opposing legalization, which is kind of ironic because it means the AMA is not following the latest science and data, also approved separate resolutions addressing the over-medicalization of cannabis and criticizing the marketing of CBD products. And again, it's the under-medicalization because them putting it this way makes it seem like Americans switching to a safer, non-addictive alternative that did not kill 107,000 Americans last year is a bad thing. So it's just kind of ridiculous how they word this. While fundamental fairness and equity principles, God, they sound like Marxists already, and they're making it fairly obvious, argue that individuals with an arrest or conviction of for cannabis-related offenses that occurred before legalization that would make such action legal should not suffer further legal or public health adverse effects, the expungement report adopted by the group said. In addition, the net social benefits to expungements should not be used to set aside or minimize the health risks associated with cannabis. And again, based on all the new science and data, very little up to date, and that's why we've got to deschedule so we can actually research more and look for positive benefits associated and not just risk, because they've been looking for risk, haven't found any. And again, highlighting particularly for youth and adolescents, it continues. When in my last video, it highlighted that youth use went down 35% in Colorado, in the most recent year, which is, again, completely contradicting what they claim here based on old data that is not true. Even when states take action to positively address legal inequities and support social determinants of health, like what, ending cannabis prohibition or legalizing for adult use, there remain significant adverse health effects of cannabis use for youth and adolescents. That is not true, you fucking clowns! Therefore, the organization's members voted to support automatic expungement, sealing, and similar efforts regarding an arrest or conviction for a cannabis-related offense for use or possession that would be legal or criminalized under subsequent state legalization or decriminalization of adult use or medical cannabis. And so it's good that they are supporting this, which could mean that Biden could eventually, continue with the expungements that he, campaigned on and has not fulfilled. And so again, this is good news, but I just want to tear them apart for their outdated views. And the adopted measure also says that the group backs ending conditions such as parole, probation, and other court-required supervision because of cannabis-related offense for use of possession that would be legal or decriminalized under subsequent state legalization or decriminalization of adult use or medical cannabis. If you just deschedule cannabis, none of this is necessary. It's just so silly at this day and age. And so with that, though, happy to share new studies that tell us, the reality of where we sit today. As this one comes from Tom Angle, a new study, legal medical cannabis tied to reduced auto insurance premiums, probably due to a substitution effect from reduced drunk driving, researchers say. As effect is stronger near dispensaries, and national legalization would mean $2.4 billion in savings. And so you can grab the link from marijuana in a moment. But I pulled the original one from Wiley Online Library, Medical Cannabis and Automobile Accidents, Evidence from Auto Insurance. So you can pause to read the abstract here, but mainly just to highlight at the bottom. This is big cost savings that would benefit so many people. We estimate that existing legalization has reduced health expenditures related to auto accidents by almost $820 million per year, with the potential for a further $350 million reduction if legalized nationally. So again, completely contradicts what the AMA is saying. It's based on their old, outdated science, and so just happy to relay the data week after week as it tells us what we already know. And so with that, U.S. trends in registration for medical cannabis and reasons for use from 2016 to 2020. So we got a lot of information in this one, but mainly just to highlight down to the results at the bottom. So you can pause to read the results here if you'd like for the further breakdown, but I just wanted to jump down to the conclusion as the enrollment in medical cannabis programs approximately increased 4.5-fold from 2016 to 2020, and this is likely what the AMA is using to deem over-medicalization. Although enrollment decreased in recreational states, because if you know what you need, you can just go to the adult use store. You don't need to go to your doctor anymore. It's not rocket science, it's common sense. Use for conditions or symptoms without a strong evidence basis increased from 15.4% to 31.4%, as if your own personal experience is not enough evidence for people to continue using a medicine that is better than an addictive one that's killing many Americans. Thoughtful regulatory and clinical strategies, like descheduling cannabis, are needed to effectively manage this rapidly changing landscape. Coming from the NIDA. Unbelievable. And so lastly, just happy to share another one, but coming from outside the US, cannabis very promising as opioid replacement, early study results show. And while we've seen this many times from studies in the US, and all these studies just call for more research, which is again just, this circular reasoning that we can't get out of until we actually just get something done, Biodata in South Africa plans to determine how useful cannabis is for pain management. So I won't get too deep into this one just because over time I've shared so many stories that point to these exact same results, highlighting why Big Pharma is getting so scared about the prospect of ending cannabis prohibition. This coming from studies in the US and around the world. Main thing just to highlight is that the reason why they're conducting this first study that have begun in Johannesburg is that more and more cannabis shows potential for reducing or replacing opioids for certain types of pain management. And so while the big pharma industry likely does not have as big of an influence in South Africa as it does in the US, that is why they're actually following the science and conducting this research, as opposed to the US where we're seeing so much research get done, but nothing comes of that because of the status quo. And so lastly, wanted to share another example, this one from the chart guys, and Dan shares with us a personal example of the absurdity of the discrepancy in cannabis laws in this country. Let's just round off this little segment of the video with lots of data, plus some personal anecdotes. This is Dan with his story.
So I just read the headline that marijuana arrests have increased 32% from 2020 to 2021.
Infuriating.
And the absurdity of the situation with the laws in this country, I just want to share a personal experience. So I grew up with one of my best friends' brother being autistic, and his entire life couldn't sleep more than 2-3 hours through the night. Every single night waking up, and like many autistic people do, would then do the head banging and was just a strain on himself and his own health as well as the family. First time he ever tried edible cannabis, slept the entire night, and every night he's taken it since, slept the entire night. Melatonin, nothing else worked.
It's not evidence?
So literally life-changing for himself, being healthier, having a sleep cycle, and the entire family. Because he's in a federally funded facility, now being an adult, while in the legally recreational state of Massachusetts, they have to go and take him off the property every single night so he can take his medicine and then take him back so he can go to bed. It's just one example because the Fed still has us on Schedule 1 with 100% zero medicinal value for cannabis. It is insane.
100% insane. And so while we can try and spread as much awareness as possible, the American people just got to wake up to this reality and make some noise. And so while it's very disappointing that the U.S. Supreme Court has rejected those cases, that definitely makes us less hopeful in the short term. Fortunately, us investors, we don't need full-scale legalization in order to make money. We need some incremental reform. And with that, that will be nice for us. But obviously, the bigger picture is ending cannabis prohibition once and for all, which will give access to American citizens a safer, non-addictive alternative to opioids, not only America, but also the world as we normalize this plant. Get rid of the double standard and start living a more balanced life with it if you choose to do so. And so with that, Todd Harrison highlighting some state news. A growing number of California cities are opening weed cafes. And so yes, of course, opening new legal outlets where you can smoke on site is going to help battle the illicit market, as lounges where customers consume cannabis on site are the next frontier of the state's recreational cannabis industry. And so it'd be great if they can approve as many of these sooner than later, because this is something they could have probably started a long time ago to help to help combat the illicit market, but better late than never. While this one comes out of New York, so thanks Todd for sharing, as New York spending $200 million on cannabis social equity properties, up to 150 retail properties will be given to social equity businesses to give them a leg up in the state's new recreational market. And so while the lawmakers likely put this together with the best intentions in mind, as if we lived in a perfect world, we don't live in a perfect world, and you cannot engineer the perfect world even through behavioral psychology or whatever. And so spending hundreds of millions on social equity properties as opposed to passing the Safe Banking Act and giving the entrepreneurs the ability to go to the banks themselves and start their businesses that they've been wanting to do, that's likely the best approach. And so annoying to see this, and I can't imagine it's going to work out the way that they intend it. And I just wanted to share this comment from Scott, which is likely more accurate. This will work out well, sarcasm of course. They're renting properties for businesses that aren't allowed to do business yet. So if there are delays in recreational approval, they'll just be pouring money into a black hole. What a fucking waste, right? And what happens if the businesses can't support the lease? And so obviously that just puts those who they put their name under these leases now basically indebted to New York as they give them the free money, and then they'll have to pay that back. Absolutely ridiculous. And so on to some New Jersey news. This one comes from Weed Street 420, highlighting this snippet that I wanted to share. Regarding the wider view on New Jersey's cannabis market outlook, DeVoe is very upbeat. So I don't necessarily know exactly where the snippet is from, so just take this with a grain of salt, but he's obviously sharing it with confidence that it's from a legit source, otherwise he probably wouldn't be sharing it. He said the CBA's goal is a sustainable, diverse, profitable cannabis market. When asked about cannabis prices, DeVoe said retail prices for indoor-grown cannabis flowers are running at $460 to $480 per ounce. That is unbelievable and likely only possible because there are so few outlets to properly supply the demand, with 8 ounces selling for $38 to $48. Unbelievable. He understands prices are high, and that's not sustainable, of course, compared to many other state legal markets, but believes New Jersey's consumers are willing to pay higher prices to access legal cannabis. He notes state taxes add to the cost of New Jersey cannabis, but also sees progress on the tax front with the state's intention to eliminate medical cannabis taxes by February of 2023. And so with that, hilarious that he highlights this. It's easy to be profitable selling at this price, but it's completely unsustainable. And so that is, again, the sweet spot that these MSOs get to be in because they've only approved the MSOs to sell and not the small biz and minority entrepreneurs that still haven't been able or been approved to sell yet, and that likely will not ever be able to sell at these high prices that the MSOs get to sell at. And so with that, some news from MSOs. Verano's resolution for conditional use of service. This comes from Chris Norman, C. Norman Law, one of our great resources on the ground in New Jersey. But so apparently Verano was supposed to, well, I'll just read it. Verano's resolution for conditional use approval on Neptune's planning board agenda for public hearing on June 22nd. So this was supposed to be today, apparently. Now, according to the site, New Jersey Cannabis Control Commission meeting for June 23rd will be rescheduled as per its website. website. And so while we could have seen Verano get the green light today, just sharing that this meeting is apparently being rescheduled as per the site. And so I will update you when this news does eventually come. But so no confirmation for Verano opening another dispensary in New Jersey as of yet. And so lastly, out of state news is Louisiana governor signs 10 cannabis bills, including significant medical cannabis expansion. So good job, governor out of Louisiana, giving your citizens more access to a safe and non-addictive alternative. And one key measure expands the number of medical dispensaries, and another prevents police from searching people's homes over a smell. So great progress there out of a red state where we might not expect it. While this one comes from Seeking Alpha, Verano is a smoking hot buy opportunity. And a few snippets here they leave in the summary. Aggressive M&A has yielded massive growth in revenue, locations, and free cash flow in full year 2021. Licenses in 18 states, active retailer in 16 states, and active producer in 14, and fantastic regulatory arbitrage opportunity with the company already succeeding in present market conditions. So I will not go through the whole article. If you are interested in learning more about Verano, you can definitely grab the link below to check this one out. Well, this one from Todd Harrison. Thanks, Todd, for sharing. As TerrAscend gears up for adult use transitions in 3 key markets. So an exclusive interview with TerrAscend chairman Jason Wild and president and COO Ziad Ghanem from New Cannabis Ventures. And so I'll put the link for the New Cannabis Ventures article down below if you wanted to check this out. Again, a good interview if you want to learn more about the company TerrAscend. Well, lastly, I wanted to share this one, DW. So thank you at Budflight for sharing this one. Top 10 cannabis brands according to Pioneer Intelligence. And so this is the first time I'm hearing of Pioneer Intelligence. Typically, I do either quote Headset or BDSA based on cannabis intelligence and data. But so with that, just to share this list, congrats to Glass House, Rove Brand, TrueLeaf, Curaleaf Inc., Kiva Confections, Papa and Barkley, Verano Brand, Select Better, Wild Canna, and 1906 New Highs. And so with that, this is the list from Pioneer. And so while it is interesting that BDSA consistently year over year says that number 1 is Cresco and number 2 is Green Thumb, we have a different intelligence platform saying completely different brands. And so I just recommend to take this with a grain of salt because of that, but obviously just good to see that some of the top MSOs are making it up on higher list through different intelligence platforms or softwares that are tracking this sort of data. And so with that, on to some other news from Curaleaf. As Curaleaf International secures 2 further licenses at its Spanish GMP facility to increase manufacturing capacity of medical cannabis extracts in European market. And so while this is early, just wanted to report approval boosts new Spanish facilities' ability to manufacture medical cannabis and products as subcommission of the Spanish Congress gives green light for the implementation of domestic medical cannabis programs. So there's more information down here if you wanted to pause to read. But with that, happy to report what MJ Biz Daily did share, what it just said there, that Spain is set to approve medical cannabis sales in pharmacies. And so while we are seeing Germany taking steps towards actually moving to adult use and presenting a legislation in the second half of this year, we see Spain set to approve medical cannabis sales in pharmacy. More European states, seeing more common sense approaches to cannabis is good news. As a subcommittee in Spain's Congress of Deputies approved a draft bill to regulate some medical cannabis sales in the country, sending the proposal to the Health Commission for another key vote this week. Though the pending law foresees extremely strict rules for distribution, the bill is being hailed as a first step that could eventually lead to broader access. And so after the expected approval by the House Commission, the Spanish Medicines Agency will have 6 months to adopt the new recommendations into regulation. So unfortunately not anytime soon, but at least 6 months until we see some sort of legislation come to fruition, which would be in line with likely Germany getting something done in the second half of this year, hopefully before the end of the year. But according to the pending legislation, flower containing THC will be permitted via prescription, but only to treat certain diseases. And so some illnesses include cancer, multiple sclerosis, and certain forms of epilepsy. And the bill foresees distribution in pharmacies. And so with that, a few other stories. This one from New Cannabis Ventures. As Canadian cannabis sales increased 3.7% sequentially in April. As Stats Canada released April retail sales for the country, fortunately 420 did help boost these sales up, with cannabis sales increasing from March by 3.7% to 372.4 million Canadian. March was revised from 358.8 to 359.3, and the sales were up 25.8% from a year ago, up from the 20.5% March growth rate. And so you can see a nice visual of that growth here. And mainly, just to highlight again, doesn't change, but most of the growth is driven by Ontario, opening 120 stores a month. We saw in April 2022, they hit the 150 million mark, basically making up a little under half of the total sales of Canada. Not surprising at all, but more information on the Canadian sales if you wanted to grab that link. And with that, just sharing another one of these Global Newswire articles coming from data companies highlighting how big the cannabis market can be worth in a few years from now that no one can ultimately predict. And so while I used to take these a bit more seriously, now I'm just showing them if you wanted to access these as a resource. But growth in medical applications of cannabis to drive the cannabis growth, as apparently according to Markets and Markets, the global cannabis market size was estimated to be valued at USD 20.5 billion in 2020. That has grown since then already significantly, and it is projected to reach USD 90.4 billion in 2026, recording a compounded annual growth rate of 28% in terms of value with various product developments happening in the category in tandem with novel product delivery solutions. This is what they think will create new opportunities within the cannabis market. So you can grab this link below if you wanted to download a PDF of some more information. But with that, just wanted to also share this last resource from from Cashflow_free on Twitter, his US Canna comp sheet as of June 21st, as of yesterday, 2022. And so the most up-to-date, so as of Tuesday, June 21st. So again, just the most up-to-date comp sheet looking at the Tier 1 MSOs, Tier 2 MSOs, Tier 3, Tier 4, and all of the stats across the board. Their current price as of yesterday, their fully diluted shares outstanding, their market cap, their net debt, their enterprise value, the number of stores that they have open versus the licenses that they can open. And then there are FactSet sales estimates in millions, FactSet EBITDA estimates in millions, EBITDA margin, FactSet EPS, enterprise value divided by sales, enterprise value divided by EBITDA, and price to earnings ratios. And so you can grab this link below for a better look because it's probably a little bit blurry and blocking out a piece there. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something from it, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.